Welcome, everyone.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Welcome to all of you here in the room. And welcome to our participatory research course participants. Welcome to the people online, if they're online yet, Kieran, all set. It's a great pleasure to have you all here, and it's a great pleasure to be able to host this really, I think, significant and interesting workshop. 50 years ago this year, right down the corridor, Bud Hall was a visiting fellow in IDS, and he wrote this short little article called Participatory Research: An Approach to Change. And as far as we know, looking back, this was the first published academic article that used the phrase participatory research. And it was in a special issue of Convergence, which he helped to edit while he was here, along with some other visiting scholars at IDS at that time, including Pancho Villagrossi, who was a refugee from Chile, who was here and wrote about his work in Chile, and others. So we're here today to celebrate and reflect a bit on that history 50 years, exactly 50 years ago. Since then, of course, participatory research has brought together many currents of thinking and many different streams, not simply that one. We're aware of the many different participatory research traditions. Here, of course, we are aware of many of us were affected by the work of Robert Chambers and others who came out of the development planning movement rather than the adult education movement, which is where Bud got his start. But many of us at IDS have also been privileged to know and to be shaped by the work of Bud and others like Rajesh Tandon and others who came out of that popular adult education movement. So in this seminar, we want to reflect a little bit about the spread of participatory research and its growth over the last 5 decades. We're delighted to be joined in person by Bud. Bud is now the UNESCO Co-Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education, which he co-chairs with Rajesh Tandon from Priya in India. Rajesh is also a partner of IDS and has been a former board member. I don't know if Rajesh is online, but if you are, Rajesh, welcome. We'll also, after I can speak for a couple of minutes, we'll start with Juan Mario Diaz is writing a history of participatory research. And his own PhD work on Orlando Falls Borda and the history of participatory research in Colombia is also a fantastic read. And he'll talk a little bit about this event as a series of events that are going on around the world as we celebrate these 50 years. But we also, then we will hear from Bud. Then we'll hear from IDS fellow Jo Howard, who will locate her work and IDS's work in this history and share reflections on her recent current participatory work with the Participation, Inclusion, and Social Change Group. Following that, we'll be joined by Jiniya Afroze from Bangladesh and Marina Apgar, the current cluster leader of the participation group at IDS, to hear about their recent work on systematic participatory approaches in the project called Clarissa. So we wanted in this seminar to get a sense of the history, but also a sense of the present and think about where we are going in the future. It's not just looking back. Then if we hopefully then can open up and have conversations with all of you. For me, this is a particularly special moment. I was a young activist, having just finished my PhD in working in a place called the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which was a training center for social change. And I had been asked there to help start a research program at a center whose slogan was, "The answers come from the people." That wasn't what I had been taught in my PhD research methods course. Answers came from strict research. And my partner and I, Juliet, were experimenting with different approaches for members of the community to gather their own data. And in 1978, Bud Hall showed up, having written the article here, and said, "What you're doing has a name. It's called participatory research." And for us, that was quite liberating to know that we, like other people around the world who were questioning and challenging the dominant participatory research paradigm, that we were with others and that this emerging movement had a name And then I was invited by Bud and others to come to one of the first international meetings in 1980 of participatory researchers, where we first met Rajesh Tandon, Orlando Falls Borda, and many of the other people who we networked with over the last 50 years. So it's great to have Bud back. Now, the first article, I just want to take a minute to share this. You all know it, but just to remind ourselves. In the first article, challenging the predominance of survey research. Let's see, how is this? Can you help me move this? Bud elaborates 7 key principles of participatory research. And again, many of you will be familiar with these principles, but it's interesting to me when I reread the article yesterday to know how much these principles have remained true and how important they still are today. This was the table of contents in this international issue, Participatory Research, an approach for change. Principles of participatory research 50 years later. Research methods have ideological implications. Remember that, PhD students. A research process should be of some immediate and direct benefit to a community and not merely the basis of an academic paper. A research process should involve the community or population in the entire research project, from the formulation of the problem to the discussion of how to seek solution to the interpretation of the findings. If the goal of research has changed, then the research team should be composed of representatives of all elements in the situation who have a bearing on that change. The research process should be seen as part of a total educational experience, which serves community needs and increases awareness and commitment within the community. The research process should be viewed as a dialectical process, a dialogue over time, and not as a static picture from one point in time. And the object of the research process, like the object of the educational process, should be the liberation of human creative potential and the mobilization of human resources for the solution of social problems. So when I rewrote that yesterday, those principles resonated with me, as I think they will resonate with many of you in this room who have continued the traditions in your own way of participatory research at IDS and elsewhere. So with that, let me just ask Juan to say a few words, and then Bud will ask you to say, how did you come up with such principles 50 years ago?
Yes. Thank you very much to John, to Joa, to Marina for organizing this event. Thank you to Bud for writing this wonderful article 50 years ago and for a life committed to promoting participatory research around the world. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today with you all. Well, I have 5 minutes to address this question of why is important the history of participatory research. And I would like to start by telling you a very short story about how I came to be confronted with this question 5 years ago. The very same question. My PhD was on false border, but not on participatory research. Was on false border's critique of political violence. However, when I finished this PhD, I realized there was a significant gap in the historical accounts of false border's work in Colombia. Most of these histories of participatory research in Colombia were very much focused on false border and his involvement with the peasant movement. With all the international researchers, the international networks he was involved in being completely left out. So I was really interested in that. And this is why I tried to connect the history of participatory research in Colombia with all other experiences around the world. And this is how I came to meet Bud Hall, Rajesh Tandon, and others, and John as well. And I realized that there was a second gap. And the second gap was false border's involvement with the indigenous movement in Colombia. The next one, por favor, please. So false border was instrumental. False border and his associates were instrumental in the consolidation of the indigenous council in South Colombia. But it's not much information about it. It's not documented. So I took advantage of one of my projects in Colombia, in which I was working with indigenous communities, and I managed to organize a workshop in the Indigenous University, UAIN, in Colombia. And I have a conversation with the elders, and I start asking questions about the origins of the creek, the council, and how that was related to Participatory Action Research, Falsborda, and his associates. And they told me a lot of stories, but never was a mention of any particular name. So I didn't hear anything about Falsborda or Paulo Freire or Bad Hall or John Gaventa. None of them appeared in my conversation with them. So at some point, I draw their attention about that, and they said to me, we don't talk about participatory research, we talk about own knowledge. This is how we call it, own knowledge. It's our own knowledge. And it's not own because we produce it ourselves. We call it own because it belongs to all of us. So we don't use particular names. We don't focus on individuals. Knowledge production is, as many other activities in this community, a way of protecting life and protecting their territory. So this is why we don't emphasize on the individuals. It belongs to all of us. And this is why it's own knowledge. So knowledge is part of well-being. Buen vivir. The next one. So it's part of our ecosystem. Knowledge production is one element of our ecosystem, our conception of life, our worldview. And at that point, I realized why it's important the history of participatory research. What is important to connect Falsborda with Bad Hall, Rajesh Tandon, Maria Luisa Swans, John Gaventa, and all of them. Why it's important to connect what we are doing in Tanzania with what we are doing in Myanmar, in Nepal, in Colombia, and Brazil. Why is that important? Because participatory research is not still part of our ecosystem of knowledge production. It's still a counter discourse. And this is why we need that names, that places, that dates, that tell us stories, particular stories of how that was produced and why. And not just who did it, but what questions they were trying to reply to, what questions they were addressing by doing that in that particular way, and how they were confronted with particular issues, but at the same time, they tried to create a knowledge that was a way of producing knowledge that give voice to those who didn't have a voice. And I think, and just to conclude my presentation, I think we need to keep doing history of participatory research, not only because the founding principles are still true and relevant, as John has said, but also because today more than ever, we are facing with a challenge of breaking the monopoly of knowledge. With all the development of technology, AI, and all of these new fora, we are facing with a new concentration of power, control of communication, control of the voices that are shared to the community, control of the information. And this is today is more important than ever. Thank you very much.
Great. Let me come over here and I can see the slides at the same time. I don't have to stand like this. I can stand like this. Thank you, John. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Juan Mario. Let me tell you where I'm coming from, and then I have a couple of things to do before I tell you about this particular slide. I've come from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. Those are the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Husanich peoples on the southwestern tip of what's now called Vancouver Island in British Columbia in Western Canada. And I work there at the Center for Global Studies. And it's those of you who've been working in Canada will know it has become our tradition to acknowledge always not only the land, but also the continuing presence of the First Nations who continue, in spite of everything, to care and look after the land where I'm privileged to live. I want to make two presentations before I say anything about this 50 years. 50 years, that's a long, what am I gonna, I don't have 50 years to tell you the story, so, but I want to make two presentations. First of all, I want to make a presentation to Joe. If you would please stand up, Joe. And this, after all these years, Rajesh and I, everybody kept saying, why don't you write a book about all this stuff you do in Knowledge for Change and all your training stuff? And we never did, because we didn't want it to be turned into a cookbook. So we still haven't done the cookbook, but we have done a book on what we think are important in terms of creating learning opportunities for people to learn this kind of work, because value-based ethical work is hard. So this is just out, and we're very proud from both Rajesh and I to present this to Joe. And one of the people right here, John Gaventa, has a very interesting chapter in there on, it won't surprise you, on power and knowledge. Does that sound familiar? John has been teaching with us for all of these years. So Joe, thank you very much for your continued carrying the tradition forward. Now this scarf is very special because you'll see one word there in a lot of different languages. What's the word you see? Knowledge is the one that I can read. I can read a few of the others. This is made by our UNESCO chair, and it's to celebrate the epistemic diversity, and we give it very rarely. So mark this in your memories. We're going to give this today to Dr. John Gaventa. Please, so somebody please get a picture. Make sure you get a picture. I'm going to put it over around your neck, and I'm going to say, thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful
Let's
journey together. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me take this off and give it to all of us here at IDS to celebrate this work over this next year, 60. So let me, what you see here are 3 words in Kiswahili and 1 word in English translated from the Portuguese. The last one you'll all know, and that's, of course, that's conscientization, which is the Paulo Freire word, which we all learned. But you might not know the first 3. And these are concepts which were foundational to us in trying to think about how to create research processes which were in line with and in harmony with the vision of Julius K. Nyerere. Nyerere was the father of independence. He was the president, and he was a remarkable intellectual who thought a lot about people and knowledge and education, and he inspired all of us who were working at the time in Tanzania. The first word is ujamaa, and that's a word very much like the word that's much more better known these days, Ubuntu. In Ubuntu, you know from Zulu, which means familyhood, and ujamaa is the Kiswahili version of community. And it's the idea that life and movement and change is centered in this spirit of ujamaa. U meaning all, jamaa meaning people, ujamaa. Second word is kujitegemea. Kujitegemea is the word for, we translate it in English into self-reliance. Self-reliance. So the idea that Nyerere had is that economically, Tanzania was to become self-reliant, not reliant on colonial economic and political structures, but also that life was going to be structured
on the ability of people to take leadership and move forward. The third one is Ragibishi. Ragibishi is the word, which the Kiswahili word for participatory research. It's a word that's closely to, it's allied to also to the word animation. It's a word that means speaking to each other, talking, dialogue. So it's a word, it's much more sophisticated than the English versions we have. But it's the word that has been used from those early days in the 70s and still is used in Tanzania in Kiswahili intellectual circles. And the fourth word there is conscientization. So why do we have conscientization there? We have that because, as you know, Paulo Freire was in exile for many years. He was in Bolivia a few months and in Chile for a year in Harvard. Then he ended up in Geneva, the World Council of Churches, where he was the education secretary. One of the first visits he made when he was a secretary at the World Council of Churches was to Tanzania. And so in 1971, Paulo Freire came, and the Pedagogy of the Oppressed had just come out. And for those of us working in adult education and literacy, here was somebody, wow, the guy really had big words. And he really made us feel, like he represented the work that we were doing in a very practical way, in a very sophisticated and a very convincing way. And we were so proud to be working along those lines. And those of you who remember the book will remember chapter 3 called Thematic Investigation, where he talks about the research process that he and his colleagues used in order to create what they called generative words that could be then broken down and used multisyllabic to construct new words and new meaning. And so for those of us in Tanzania, expatriate and Tanzanians alike, we were in this atmosphere where there were very few people who had a title as a researcher. There weren't that many PhDs anywhere. But there was a belief, in the ministry and in the political apparatus that research was a useful thing. It's going to be, they didn't know that most research isn't very useful at all. They thought research, wow, this is what we need. And so there was a lot of interest for those of us who had an identity as a researcher. There was a lot of interest in what we might be able to help with or not. But as this period of from some 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 75 went on, many of us came to find ourselves really discouraged and really ill at ease, because the way that we had all been taught to do research, and we were all clever people, we all had PhDs, we had been taught that we should study the situation, read articles, talk to other scholars who've talked about this kind of a thing, and then go out and get information from people, come back, analyze that information, you write it up, make some recommendations on the basis of that. But that meant that people like myself, a young expatriate who had never, been brought up in Tanzania, was going to, dream up, some kind of research questions. I was then going to get somebody else to go out. It took me a couple of years to get fluent in Swahili, to go out into the communities. And then, but I was happy analyzing the data. I knew how to do that. But what do you analyze data with? What do any of us analyze data with? Whatever the hell's in your head. And what if you don't have any experience of being a rural farmer? You don't have any experience being a girl who now is not allowed to go on to school after grade 4. What if you don't have any experience of working in the market there in Cardiaco in that picture in Dar es Salaam? Then you are limited as to what the power of your analysis can be. So little by little by little, and through conversations that we had with Maria Elisa Swans, with Marjorie Mbaligny, with Kemal Mustafa, with Yusuf Qassam, this idea and we talked about it as being anti-colonial. This is before everybody now talks about decolonization and all of that. People didn't do it, but we did. We said that the methods that were being used by the majority of the research community in Africa and in Tanzania in particular were colonial methods, which in fact was true. And that what we were looking for was something, so we decided we have to give it another name. So we took participatory from Nyerere's vision of a participatory democracy based on Ujamaa, Kujitegemea, and Uragbishi. We took those concepts and we said, what would a research project look like, a process look like, if it were based on those with a little bit of seasoning from Freire? And together, those concepts resulted in what we eventually labeled participatory research. And our idea, which of course completely naive, our idea was that if we called it something like this, nobody could ever do it differently than we intended. Whenever anybody would do it, whenever they said it like that, it would be, social justice, raise the banners and equality for all and that. Well, we found out actually when you get a good idea, a lot of people take it and they do what the hell they want to with it. But and to be honest, academics didn't pay any attention to this at all. None, not a single. The first academic that I can think of that paid any attention to this, the first one was Peter Park, a sociologist who was Korean origin, and he knew that in doing research with Korean immigrants to the US, that his kind of research wasn't working. So he was attracted. And John Hurst from Berkeley, a peace activist, a social justice activist, he thought this was a good idea. Let's see what else I've got. What other pictures? 5 minutes left. So I got a job in Canada with something called the International Council for Adult Education. And I asked them if they would be happy to, allow us to create a participatory research network. So we did. And we began to have meetings in all kinds of places. The first meeting where I met Rajesh was in Caracas, Venezuela. But and then this particular one is in Managua, Nicaragua, and you can find this young John Gaventa next to Rajesh, Father Cardinal, and Yusuf Qassam, and a number of other people.
I think I still have the same shirt.
And you don't look that different. A little less hair, but you're doing pretty well. Keep going. And this is a schematic. This was actually notes that we made. This actually came from another meeting. We were trying to map out this participatory research network. So you find all the names of different people from different parts of the world. This came from a later meeting in Nicaragua. So one of the things that, after I left and I came here, and I met Francisco Villagrossi, but I started getting in touch with a lot of people in other parts of the world. And so little by little by little, what we realized is that there was growing out of what I called majority world, that the foundations for this kind of research and the first theorization and the first practical work really was coming out of the majority world. So it's Nyerere, Freire, Falsborda, Tandon, Raman, Bellini, Swans, Qassam, Villagrossi. Here's a number of other meetings, and what we did is we met. Nobody respected any of us where we lived. But when we showed up in somebody else's country, they would say, oh, what the international people, who is this John Gaventa guy? How come all these people are coming to talk with John Gaventa? So suddenly John Gaventa becomes, the center of something's going on there. So from there we would go to India, and Rajesh, who nobody knew, young Rajesh Tandon, and somebody would say, what are all these people coming here to talk about? So Rajesh would get, pumped up. Somebody would come to, to Canada, have a meeting, with me. And they'd say, who the hell is that Bud Hall anyway? Young guy, what the hell is he doing? And they say, yes, but look, there's 22 people that came. They're talking about stuff together. So we use that as a strategy to kind of build ourselves and to create a vision of our work, which was frankly much larger than the reality. Probably still is. And so you've got meetings here. There's Miles Horton, who very important, Diane Marino. There's the Miles Horton and Paulo Freire, the Brabant, Phyllis Cunningham. There's the president of Argentina, 1985, Pancho Villa, Dame Nita Barrow, fantastic woman. And this is the meeting in Ljubljana, which caught Juan Mario's attention. This is Juan Mario's. So I'm just going to say two things about what's happening now and the future. I'll just keep it very brief. In terms of our work, there's a million things going on. It's a great time to be doing this work. In terms of our work, the today work is building this Knowledge for Change Consortium, which is we've got 24 training hubs mostly in the global south, where universities and community groups have made formal agreement to provide training opportunities for young people, both community young people and university young people. So that's today. In the future project, the project which we're in the midst of, the very interesting one, I'd be happy to talk more about that later informally, is called Decode. It's a project gathering decolonized transformative knowledge emerging from community and indigenous groups which are creating knowledge on their own outside of university. So it's a community-led, community-curated knowledge processes, particularly in the context of climate change. So there's one of the things, I'll just leave you in terms of the future, what needs to be done. We've got people in, almost every university in the world, somebody who can tell you stories about participatory research or whatever. What we have yet done, we have not built the knowledge infrastructure at community level, so that the partnerships that we've got remain very, very unbalanced. The power remains in the universities. So I would hope in the next, iteration, the next 50 years, we will find a way to build that community knowledge capacity so that communities, trade unions, social movements, they have their own independent capacity to do work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bud. Let's hand it over to Joe Howard.
Thank you. I feel somewhat humble, but very appreciative of being part of this panel today. And it's quite an interesting juncture to come in with my slide. I've just got a couple of slides, but I wanted to just start with how I came to participatory research. And it was actually in Managua, Nicaragua, which a little bit after Bud. And I was working with a social movement. And it was such an amazing time to be there. It was in the 90s when the social movement was trying to reconceptualize its role, having no longer being a sort of an organization of the Revolutionary Party of the 1980s. So they were rethinking what they were in terms of being the Nicaraguan community movement. So they were asking themselves, what does it actually mean to be a community movement? And they were like, okay, so we should be starting from the community, but they'd grown up with a model that was very top down. And it was about, so we deliver things that the party and the revolution wants us to do with communities. So that was about trying to reverse that. And I had the great privilege to work in a training team with Luisa Maya, who had been part of the alphabetization, the literacy campaign in the 80s, who brought into this work his popular education, his knowledge of popular education, of adult education. So I inadvertently, in a way, I ended up there and sort of riding the wave that you were part of right there. You were there right at the beginning. So that for me was a great grounding in why you need to work from communities and work with communities. And so I was also part of workshops when I was learning methods alongside these methodologists and so on. But hearing stories about what's going on, working with community leaders from across the country about, so what are the realities there? So that was a real kind of grounding in where you need to start in any sort of transformation, organizational, social transformation, start from the realities of the people who are living them. And that was a very strong, that was how that work was centered. So I found that quite remarkable, and reading the Prior at 40 publication and seeing how I kind of connected in with these stories. When I came back and did the MPhil at IDS. And John, I was so lucky to have John as my supervisor for my dissertation research. And then so I was, okay, what is this PRA stuff? I've never heard of that. Who is Robert Chambers? And everyone's like, Robert Chambers is the man for participation. So I then encountered a whole different world of discussion and into the international development arena of participation and participatory methods and PRA. And hugely, we owe so much to Robert and his inspiration and his innovation and his work over so many years, sharing his knowledge, the workshops, his approach to building knowledge together, I think has been quite remarkable and influential and carries on resonating in the work that we do. So I came to IDS and did my, I did my dissertation on participation, not using really participatory methods, and then went away and thought about that. What am I doing here? And then jumping forward, I then went on to do a PhD a bit rather later at Bristol. And I asked the ESRC, they said, oh, we can give you some training in research methods. I'm great. Can I have participatory research methods, please? And they're like, what are they? I mean, literally, there was no provision for training in participatory methods provided by ESRC. So we self-organized, and we got Danny Burns came, and we organized the students organized a workshop, for training workshop with colleagues from Norway and Sweden. Mary Bryden Miller came from the US, and so we've managed to start to access and these different sources and these different inspirations and pioneers of participatory research. Back to IDS. So what we're doing, I think, collectively here, and in the participation cluster, but also many other clusters are using participatory approaches, and we're collaborating and working together and looking how we can bring these approaches into humanitarian work, how we can bring it into concerns about the climate, and thinking about, so how are those processes? How can we bring PRA methods, which are so effective, but how can we embed them in processes, in sequenced, thoughtful, careful processes that allow us to really engage the knowledge of people who can make the changes and hear them, create space for them, use our whatever we call it from IDS, our convening capacities, but put that at the service of people and people's knowledge to make changes where these need to happen. And here's just a couple of examples of using some really great visual, creative methods like rivers of life and problem trees and so on, but embedding those in processes of participatory research. I did want to do a shout out for MAP. Peter Taylor, I think you were, so when I did my master's here, there was no MAP, the Masters in Power, Participation and Social Change, which is fantastic. And there's a couple of mappers, current mappers here, so lovely to see you. There we are, and that's what map are we? 19. So 19th year of MAP, and that has really brought activists and people from different parts of the world to reflect on their work, to think about how you bring power, to understand, to analyze power and participation, and then take it back into their work all over the world. Yeah, so thanks, Peter, for Peter and John, I think. I can't remember who else. And Jethro, and then Rosie was convener of MAP for a long time and has been, continues to be an amazing colleague working there. Anyway, shout out for MAP, and also shout out for the short courses that we run, which are about strengthening, working with people in academia, but in practice, NGOs and different places, bringing them into the short courses. So we do teach academic degrees, but we also try to work across with different sectors. And there's a whole group of the PAR short course participants here today who've given up their space in their workshop for this event today. So shout out for them. So we're working on how we bring different methods into processes of bringing participatory research into processes of social change. And we one thing that we have done with Danny again, and a whole load of people from IDS is think about, so what kind of approaches can we bring into can we share through publishing? And we've edited a book on participatory research and inquiry. And we've also put a lot of our work onto the Participatory Methods website, and which is really to try and get beyond individual methods and have people think about what are the processes, what are the design, what is the thinking and the principles. Back to the principles, I think that's where we started. What are those principles that need to underpin our work? And so we're building this out and inviting people to collaborate and share methods and methodologies through this site. So I think what we're trying to do is to build those networks that Bud was talking about. It's still hard. We still have to work hard to get recognition, to get funding, but it's exciting to see there are more and more connections happening. We're doing work in the UK as well as in the international development sphere, and building up those networks. What we are working on currently, one of the things we're working on currently, well, we do a lot of work that we call participatory action research. We also do work on systemic action research, which I'm going to ask our online colleague, Jiniya, to introduce and talk about, because she's done that work in Bangladesh and can describe it and has lived it in a way that we'd like to hear about it from her. So we're going to invite her to join us from online. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here today. And I think you can hear me well, just checking the sound.
We hear you.
Great. All right. So yeah, it's great to hear the rich and diverse experience from the colleagues and histories of participatory action research. And I would like to, what I would like to do in the next few minutes is bring us into the messiness of it in practice. So to share what it looks like and feels like when we try to, leave those PAR values on the ground in real time, in complex system, and with real people whose lives are shaped by structural injustice. So I will share some reflections and learning from our journey with Clarissa, which stands for Child Labor Action Research Innovation in South and Southeastern Asia. This was a 5-year FCDO-funded program focused on tackling worst form of child labor, and our work was primarily focused in Bangladesh and Nepal, and where we did wanted to explore worst form of child labor through a systemic action research approach. So in Bangladesh, Terrorism hosted the program, and I had the privilege of working as the country coordinator for Clarissa in Bangladesh. So I joined Clarissa just after returning to Bangladesh from the UK, where I completed my PhD in childhood studies. Before that, I also worked with other child rights organizations in Bangladesh on work related to children's participation and community-led work. So I was excited to be part of Clarissa, which promised not just participation, but co-creation, collective inquiry, and so on. What I didn't anticipate, though, was how deeply this work would challenge and transform the way we do the work in practice on the ground, the way we think about partnership, knowledge, and power, and how those relationships actually show up in every stage of the research process. So today I want to share 5 key learning from that journey. So first point is about how it helped us to rethink partnership, and because in participatory action research, how we relate to each other is where the real work begins. Like for us, it's where many of the deeper tensions surfaced, especially around power, ownership, and voice. It meant, sitting with some uncomfortable questions like who gets listened to, whose ideas actually shape the work, who has the final sign-off. So I still remember one of our early reflection workshops where we were sitting in a circle. We were representatives from INGO, from local partners, researchers, all sharing thoughts on how things were going. Then one of the participants, one of the facilitators, who was quiet for some time, gently asked, like, we talk about participation, but do we actually have the power to change the direction to this work? So now that wasn't a confrontation, but it was a genuine, honest question. And it came from somebody deeply committed to the project, but unsure where they stood in the decision making. That moment really stayed with me, and it made us all pause and think. So we were very decisions are not centrally held. So our, because IDS was holding the program, so the research design was ideally sitting with IDS, but there was a conscious effort to bring everyone on the same table, from the local organizations, the researchers, the INGOs, to shift that power dynamics and to create a safe space where all of us contributed to the design and implementation of the work that we were doing. So even though the work was rooted in the local realities, the leadership in it was in Bangladesh, because Terre was holding the process. It is an international NGO. So at the beginning, it felt like a bit uncomfortable, like whether we are, becoming the intermediary of transferring the northern idea to the ground, to the local communities. But we had to do something about that. We built in feedback loops, we created safe space, we had co-design sessions where local partners and everyone involved could really question and reshape the work. So that is, I think, very important learning for me, because we had to keep asking ourselves, were we really enabling local leadership? Were we still carrying out one-dimensional agenda, or we were really collaborative in the process? And it wasn't always comfortable. It wasn't always linear and smooth. It meant letting go of control, accepting the ambiguity and the messiness, and allowing ourselves to be led by those who were closest to the lived realities. So in the end, we had to reimagine what we meant by partnership. And we had used a few tools to self-reflect. We had partnership rubric where we used some specific moments where we reflected on how we are contributing to to this program, how we're doing as partner in the process. So there were some tools used to reflect on the process and trying to better ourselves in the way we were doing our work. So the next point where I would like to go is about this shift in partnership also meant that there was a shift in how we approached learning or knowledge production, because at the beginning, in the design phase, there was the idea that the thematic groups were, I mean, we used to call them work streams. Those are mostly led by experts from IDS and a few other consortium members, mostly from the global north. So the thinking was that knowledge would be generated within these groups and then trickle down to the local level. It seemed like a practical, efficient model at the initial design phase, but we realized that it was also a bit extractive. I mean, we were assuming that the knowledge needed to come from the top, and that process was not really helping us to value the local expertise that was already there on the ground. So soon after we made a change in the design of it, we decided to open up our learning process. So we created new spaces in the program where we had design platforms where the facilitators, local researchers, and voices from the field through the people who were working closely with the communities and the children were part of the co-design space. And it helped us to, push ourselves to ask deeper, more challenging questions and trying to collectively, trying to find answers to those questions. So what we learned along the way is that real participatory research means, letting go of control, embracing the collective inquiry. It's about designing for, some curiosity and not certainty, and recognizing that knowledge exists in places we often overlook in traditional development work. So another learning, which is very important and very dear to us, is breaking the bias, and how it helped us to think children as researchers and system thinkers. One of the most profound shifts was about how we trusted children, not just as participants, but as researchers and analysts, because initially our plan was to collect life stories from children, by the children, and more importantly, children will analyze the stories themselves. And we'll create the complex system map. And you can see one of those maps on the screen now. So to be very honest, and many of us, including myself, we had our doubts. Could children really do it? Would they understand the tool? Could they make sense of such complexity? So we were a little nervous about the ambition. And we understand that this hesitation came from our, the idea of adultism, a bias we unknowingly carried. Instead of letting that hold us back, we wanted to be a bit brave, and we made the choice to trust the process and trust children, the participants themselves. So we adapted the tools, created safe learning spaces, and supported children with care. And what they produced was remarkable. I mean, of course, they did not just participate, but they led the process. And engaging with children in that process was not easy. Of course, it took more time. It required careful effort to make sure they felt empowered and supported. We had to be patient to allow them to work through the complexity at their own pace without rushing or simplifying the task. But the process, the outcome itself was really amazing in the sense that children owned the children, of course, they know better about their lives, but they own the process itself, and they identified the real problems that they wanted to take forward through the action research groups. So
Thank you,
that,
Jiniya. Just a minute to wrap up now before we pass to Marina. Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. So yeah, just my two final points about narrative, changing the narratives of how we engage with the small business owners, because often in traditional work, we see them as like a perpetrator. There is a tendency to blame them in the traditional child labor spaces. But through this participatory action research process, it helped us to work with them and work alongside to understand the vulnerabilities that the business owners themselves experience, and to bring a shift in the way we were engaged in the conversation and the dialogue with the business owners to make the workspaces a better and safer place for children. And my final point is about how it helped us to shift our ways of working at the organizational level and also in personal, individual level, because from Clarissa, we take on the learning, and in Terre's Home, we are trying to spread it across other projects as well, where real participation, co-design, and children as analysts and mutual learning ideas are embedded in the other work that we are doing. It's hard and it's not always welcomed by the traditional implementers, but we have learned that with careful effort and genuine willingness and intention, it's possible to bring change in the way we do participatory work with children on the ground. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jiniya. And now to Marina. Thanks, Marina.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Jiniya. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this conversation today. I just wanted to offer a couple of thoughts about how the work we're doing in the Participation, Inclusion and Social Change cluster is thinking about the future of participatory research and participatory methods, which is a core stream of work for us. So there are kind of three areas I'm going to briefly mention. So the first, building on what Jiniya was just describing in terms of the systemic action research processes that we've been evolving, developing with Danny, Jo, and others. We're holding a question right now around how participatory research processes can open up pathways to systems change. So what we're seeing in the programs is that it's all about the relational space. So both in terms of the way Jiniya described how we do the work, but also the focus on reconfiguring dynamics, relationships in systems. For example, business owners, employers, connecting with working children in different ways, right? So that kind of opens up this question about the transformative potential of these approaches. The second is work that relates to the role of participatory research and processes as a form of healing or collective healing. So work of Jackie Shaw, Tessa Lewin, and others is very much thinking about that in the context of working with activists. But other work, for example, in the peace building space, we've seen how action research processes embody collective healing. They become, if you like, the mechanisms for that collective healing. So given the state of the world, which I won't dwell on, this seems to be a question that would be good to hold. And the third one is about the diversity of creative, arts-based, embodied approaches, methods that are part of this broader repertoire that we hold. And what these are doing is really shining a light on emotion and the affective dimensions, right? Which historically, I think, has been less the focus. So moving or building on, I should say, the cognitive to think about emotion as part of it. And that's been really helpful in work that colleagues doing around disability inclusion, et cetera, have been working on, many other ways in which that's happening. So those are kind of three streams of work that I think maybe to stimulate some discussion about where does this all go. Thank you.
Thanks, Marina.
Thank you, Marina, Jiniya, all the participants. For me, it's you talk about a common method if in participatory methods is the river of life. And I was trying to think about the river of participatory research that we've actually heard here today. The early work by Bud, the way that it influenced many of us, the way we were then influenced by other streams, and the way that it's continuing in magnificent ways in the latter case stories that we've heard. And Jiniya, you've reminded us that it's not always easy, that there's problems which you haven't dwelled on today. And one of the questions from Terry Cannon on board is, are we romanticizing things a bit and romanticizing the community a bit? And I think that's a problem that many of us in the field have also wrestled with. So thank you for continuing this stream. And one question also asked, will 50 years from now, people also be discussing participatory research? And will there be any people left to discuss it? But with that, let's open it up for questions, comments, your thoughts about your own histories, but also about challenges and where we go in the future. Bud, do you want to rejoin up here? Jackie, please introduce yourself for the people online. And people online, if you put things on the Q&A, we'll try to catch them.
Hi, my name's Jackie Shaw, and I'm in the Participation, Inclusion and Social Change cluster as well. And I'd like to pick up a bit more on Terry's question and what Jiniya was also speaking to, which is the tensions around these processes and the difficulties as well, because I think it's a really important part of the picture. To put things in perspective, also came out of a adult education and community work background, and ended up or didn't end up, started forming a small NGO specializing in participatory video, and then did my PhD research based on that, because I was interested in understanding the difficulties and challenges as well as the opportunities of participatory action research, community work as vehicles for change. And I think it's a really important part of the picture. I don't want to go on and on, but that work, building understanding of the tensions and how to navigate them is really crucial, I think, because the idea that there's a romanticized ideal participatory research project out there doesn't exist. We work in very complex contexts of extreme inequality, power dynamics, corruption, conflict, and so on. So what we really need to be doing and are doing is building some understanding of that, because the navigation of those tensions is part of our processes. So again, it's kind of touching back to what Joe said about this is about processes, how to drive and mediate processes. And yeah, I guess that's a real passion of mine. So just in answer to Terry.
Thank you, Jackie. Others? Rosie.
Thank you, and thank you for a really, really fascinating series of presentations. I'm Rosie McGee from the Power and Popular Politics cluster here at IDS. We've been working on participatory approaches for a long time, including in Colombia a lot, and through some of my work at IDS. So I guess I had a few comments rather than questions maybe, but they very much go in the same line that Jackie was talking about noticing and negotiating and giving the due time and space to some of the complexities and the tensions around this. One point which came to my mind when you were talking, Bud, was how on the question of decolonizing the way that we work, I find now working with colleagues in the Global South, often I've had pushback precisely from very colonized mindsets about research approach. And I struggle with that. It's something that, I don't think any of us have got the answer to, but it would just be really interesting to hear any comments on that. All these years on, all these decades on, when this started out as a kind of knowledge decolonizing process, we have continued to train, we in the Global North have continued to train researchers from the Global South, or pump out approaches for the training of researchers from the Global South, which have now left a really big, strong commitment to the very conventional and to some of the narrownesses of very conventional research approaches in the mindsets of lots of those that we would like to work with. So just to comment. And the second point is also very much about tensions and about the power relations involved in funding relationships. how I often reflect on how so much of the research or the work that we do at IDS, the changes that we're working for at IDS, in my view, as a committed participatory action researcher, would be so much more effectively engaged through participatory research than through conventional research. And the reason why we don't do it is that the funding streams just aren't available for it. And I was remembering, as I was listening to everybody, probably 14, 13 years ago, trying to get the funding together for an action-oriented process that we were leading here on power, violence, citizenship and agency in a handful of countries. And taking one look, literally, I took one look at the ESRC funding application form and I thought, no, not even worth thinking about it, because it was so incredibly narrow. At that point, you still had to name as your partners only organizations which the ESRC knew of and had approved of, or just, you know, it wasn't going to fit. And I think that's come on to some extent, because I know, you know, colleagues have had ESRC funding for substantial research projects with a participatory research element within them, but it hasn't come on enough. And I just raise that as something which is frustrating in a world where the effectiveness of everything that we do is really important, because there's a lot of competition for resourcing and for people's time and for people's attention. It's frustrating that still some of the changes that we would like to see that would be so much better pursued through these means, we're pursuing them through other means simply because that's where the funding is, insofar as the funding is there for those, which is not always either, of course.
Thank you. I'll take one more question here, and there's lots of questions coming up, and there's a couple online. So if the speakers can keep notes, let's get the questions out, and then we'll come back for a couple of comments in the very end. And try to keep them brief if you can, because lots of things are coming up.
Very, very quickly, Marie Stadros, because we're dealing with a panel that is incredibly humble, can I just ask, just as a question, whether we can put for everyone online and here the availability of 3 amazing resources. So Bud and Rajesh have just released, and it's an extremely affordable book online and in print. It's called Teaching Community-Based Participatory Research. It's a fantastic resource. And so it is available if you want to sort of read more from the different perspectives. And then, and so that can be, we'll put it in the chat. And the second resource, which Joe put on screen but did not mention, it is a brilliant, this is my go-to resource on participatory action methods for a lot of things, is a book that is available for people here at IDS, online version in the library, but also available other places. It's the Sage Handbook of Participatory Research and Inquiry. It's a 2-volume amazing set, Joe with Danny Burns and Sonia, and a book that you can get a discount on if you order online early, which is John's new book with Gabe, which is Power and Just Transitions. It's coming out in January. It is absolutely amazing, and you can get a discount on it if you order it early. Thank you.
That wasn't a paid ad.
Hi, this is Deepta Chopra. I'm in the governance cluster, nothing to do with participation ostensibly. However, we've been using a lot of methods in terms of theater of the oppressed in our research in South Asia on gender backlash. And I wanted to ask the panel the question about going forward in this environment where there is increasing hostility towards rights, towards collective action, towards any sorts of even collective getting together, and people are being targeted. How does one, continue to uphold the time and the trust that it takes to do this participatory research, and how do you see participatory research findings and analysis to contribute to the countering or the anti-backlash approaches? Thank you.
Questions online, which are similar to this, which has to do with the challenge of while many community efforts and social movements seem to have a short life, the systemic areas we're dealing with take a very long time to change. So how do we build resilience over time in this work? And then I think that leads to another set of questions about how do we go forward where collective knowledge production, in a world where collective knowledge production is not challenging other forms of power. And in fact, those other forms of power are closing down, as Deepta has reminded us, the space to even produce our own knowledge. So maybe we could just ask people to the challenge that Irina Gait, our friend, is saying that, as I sort of say, that a lot of the collective knowledge production doesn't necessarily change the bigger power systems. And now, in fact, we see the globalization of power closing down spaces where people can even raise their own voices for that knowledge production. So, but I think you and I were reflecting a little bit on this earlier today. How does this knowledge piece of change really link to the broader power relations that we also need to change, and how do we do that over time? Meanwhile, we've had some questions here about the challenges and difficulties, and how do we respond to those challenges and difficulties in participatory research. And there's one question here raising that, is this a white methodology that was developed in the North and imposed in the Global South? And I think we could all reflect on that. And I think, Bud, your PowerPoint actually gave a number of the people who informed you from the Global South, from Africa, who really taught us these methods in the beginning. But we might reflect on, is this methodology itself in danger of becoming a Northern top-down imposed methodology? So just a few questions, all big ones, but let's just give each speaker a couple of minutes to say anything you'd like to say on these questions. And then we'll wrap up by 2:30, because I know our course has to get back to the course. Thank you, Mark.
Don't we go in the order that we started? I don't want to disturb.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to be very brief, and I want to address the question about how to keep doing co-production and participatory research in context of conflict and armed control by illegal and legal groups. And I think theater is one of these options. Just to give an example, in the city of Buenaventura, and also in another part of Colombia, Catatumbo, that now is in the news because of all the problems with the guerrillas, people are addressing big issues in a very oblique way. For example, talking about cleaning the river, decontaminating the river. Or, for example, creating a play about their ancestry. And they have been able to co-produce, it's co-produced by people, led by researchers, but co-produced by people, a very interesting place through which they convey a very strong political message, but in a way that the armed actors are not able to discover. They cannot see it. And they are interested in theater, so which is a good thing. So that allows people to come together. But there is one more benefit, which is to keep people together. Beyond doing, beyond denouncing or beyond pointing out issues or problems, is keeping people together. And the main impact of violence is social fragmentation, is breaking the social tissue. So by doing these things, you keep people together and they can come out with different ideas.
Let's go backwards, I think. I'm just going to be a bit disruptive here. If you don't mind, Jiniya, can we come to you for any thoughts? And then Marina, and then Joe, and then I'll ask Bud to conclude. Just
Yeah,
very briefly, please.
Yeah, I think there is one challenge in while bringing a system change is the system actors themselves. There is, I mean, the biasness among us. That is one thing. It takes time. That is true. But the system actors are not ready to bring on those changes and to hear from the people who are affected by that. So we found that to be really problematic, especially in a society where it is very much hierarchical, and especially as we were working with the children, working children, it was even more complex in our context.
Thank you. Marina.
Thanks, John. I guess I just have one short reflection about the question of how this works over time. And I think is that, and it relates a little bit to the point, John, of whether these are our global north methods that are taken to other places. I think change happens through people everywhere in the world, right? We are not the ones that are creating the processes of change. And I think we need to be really clear when we're thinking about the work that we do to understand the spaces that we are supporting, we are becoming allied with, we are engaging with in many different forms, right? And that links to the points around funding streams, etc., short-termism, all of the kind of over-projectized views of research that we're aware of. So I like to think of it more as how do we support the movements that are there and that exist? And if that is our starting point, then I think change does happen through those ongoing processes through time. And it doesn't begin or end with us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very stimulating hearing these different responses. I guess for me, there are two things, which responding both to how to do it in these difficult settings and how to sustain it. One is that there is no one answer. We're always like, oh, what's the magic? You know, this is what we need to do. It's like we need to be working at different fronts on different levels and all at the same time. So that's why it's so important to be working with different kinds of organizations, to be supporting new generations of participatory researchers and so on. We're not going to find, oh, this is the entry point to changing the system, but we have to keep chipping away in different ways and working together and allying ourselves. And the other thing, I was thinking about this social fragmentation, and this is something that I think also in the UK is a big issue about isolation, and what I think the kind of approaches, methods that we're using enable how we can open up and facilitate spaces for dialogue, which we know is at the heart of participatory research, about bringing people together to share their experiences and enter into dialogue, considering what those risks can be and thinking about how to make those supportive spaces for people to actually make connections with each other and build relationships.
I think I'm already hooked up.
You are.
So I'll
We
be
doubly hooked.
Doubly hooked up and be too loud. Well, first of all, let me just, okay. Let me just say that when you see somebody called Bud Hall sitting here, what you're actually seeing is somebody called Bud Hall. So my mother and father called me. But you're actually seeing somebody who is the product of thousands and thousands of stories. In a way, you know, I was born with nothing in my head, and day by day by day by day, my head has been filled by stories. And I've been fortunate to have, sometimes through luck, sometimes through choice, to have traveled, you know, on a journey which has allowed me to hear story after story after story after story after story. So all I can do, all I'm trying to do, I'm 81, all I'm trying to do is to make sense of these thousands of stories. These thousands of stories which have come through my head, some of which are dancing in there right now. So if I think about, I like, Juan Mario, thank you very much. I like keeping people together. Peter and I, at lunchtime, we were talking, Peter's is a musician. And he's bringing people together. He did it in Canada. He's done it in Ireland. He's doing it here, not through you know, an ideological, not through the new communist musical party, but through people who like music. But what he's creating is creating a culture of listening, a culture of respect, and a culture of joy. People are having fun. So let's not forget that one of the anytime our work can bring people together so that they can hear each other's stories, so that they can enjoy, maybe it's a good meal, maybe have some fun, then it's a good thing. And we don't care what you call it. We don't care where you got the money. Probably you won't get any money, but you do it anyway. And because I think that, and we've always needed, there's never been a time when power has been the people's. Think about the beginnings of time. We've had, monarchies and feudalism and, earlier forms of capitalism. Now we've got a really mean sort of cowboy capitalism on the run. There's never been a time when people have been, in control of what would make, their lives, their children's lives a little bit better. And yet people have never stopped. Never stop. I think I'm fortunate to live in that part of Canada where there have never been they never had treaties. Treaties stopped at the Rocky Mountains. So we're living in the treaty process right now in British Columbia. And what I've learned is that you talk about being shut down. How about, being torn away from your families, told you can't speak the language, shot, beaten, laws upside, one side, downside. If you're a woman, you can't remain Indigenous if you marry a white guy. And, there's literally, this is genocide. This is what the Canadian state has been practicing and a lot of other states and yet, right now, we are living at a time when there has never been more interest in the recovery of Indigenous languages. We have never had more Indigenous PhDs. The new government of Canada right now, just yesterday, named their cabinet 3 Indigenous cabinet ministers. Are they all kind of colonized themselves? Is that how they got there? We're all colonized. So the answer is yes, but are they working? Are they listening? Are they creating spaces for people come together? Are they using the arts? Are they using poetry? Are they using ceremony? Are they using dance? Are they using to help build this kind of thing? All of that stuff is what we need to do. And so I was just telling John, if you read the news or listen to any goddamn news, if that's your world, wow, it's pretty depressing. We've got reform here. We've got nearly had the bad guys in Canada, very bad guys in the US, a lot of bad guys in India, God knows where. That's not my world. And it's not the world of, I don't think any of you, I know several of you, it's not your world. Your world are the stories that you are connected to. There's stories from Bangladesh. There's stories from other parts of England. There's stories from, musicians. There's stories. That's your world, and that's a good world. And there's probably more, there's more churn and more energy to resist and to be resilient now than there's been for many years. So let's not get sucked down into somebody else's negative narrative. The world is not broken, and we are not part of a broken world.
Thank you very much, Bud. Thanks for that wonderful ending. Thanks to everyone online. I apologize. There's still several very rich comments on there, and I see some hands coming up, but we have to vacate this room so the course on participatory research may get on. So we really appreciate everyone being here. And I'd like to thank the panel particularly. I think our hope was that we could start with the past, but move to the present and the future. And I think you've really helped us do that in a very organic way. And I also want to just end with a particular thanks to Bud, because Bud, not only has your brain been filled with stories from around the world, but you've been the gadfly. sharing those stories with all of us around the world, creating partnerships, sharing ideas. And we thank you for that 50 years of work. And we look forward to another 50 years of sharing stories of struggles and successes to start knowledge creation, build knowledge creation from below for transforming the systems above. Thanks, everyone.